All right, I thought we'd go ahead and get started. Really excited about tonight and thankful for y'all coming out. This is a really important topic, and what a blessing to have so many people in our community who have gone before us and have learned some things, have learned probably from trial and error, right? About the way to kind of raise a family that is intentionally aware of just the joy of serving together as a family and raising kids who are other-centered. We certainly live in a culture that tells our children that being self-centered or inwardly centered is not only appropriate, but it feeds it through marketing and the cultural cues that they get. In fact, I was reading this book I'm having Zach read called Do Hard Things, and it talks about low expectations for teenagers and where a lot of that comes from and how focused the marketing industry is on keeping low expectations for kids, keeping them self-absorbed, keeping them self-focused as a means of creating a demanding market for products. And it's really discouraging to think about kind of what we as believers in Christ and those called into His service to be His hands and feet in the places that He plants us, what we're up against. And so I think we have to be intentional. I don't think these things happen on their own. We're not, as sinners, wired to pursue the love of others in the name of Christ. And so how do we build in kind of a culture in our own families and in our church community that supports that? So that's what we're here to do tonight, and I'm just really thankful for such a great turnout. It's really exciting. So we have asked a number of families who have, when I was thinking about who to ask, I was thinking about families who have kids who, once they didn't have to do this stuff anymore, chose to do it, that they would be great families to learn from. Because we know that you don't turn 18 and then all of a sudden a switch flips inside you and you want to pursue the things of God in a way of serving others. That started a lot sooner. And so when I was thinking about that, and Michael was great, gave me some ideas as well of families in our church who have kids that if you look at them either in their high school, their college, and even beyond, that they are making time and space in their lives to do this. What an opportunity to learn. So to that end, I thought we would first just really quick introduce yourselves and just a general idea of how old your kids are, kind of what life season you're in. We'll just do this really quickly, and then we're going to turn it over to the Bryants to kick us off with an introduction. So we are Dear Story.
Yeah, tell us.
If you want me to do the dad side?
Why don't you do the story? Go ahead.
I'll get it started. But maybe in the direction that you think is not the right direction. Because I don't know how intentional we were about these things. I didn't grow up in a church that was missions or maybe even Jesus-oriented enough. And so I was a spiritual retard coming into college and all that stuff. And as a dad, once I woke up and had 4 kids one day, and just taking care of them was about, what you call it, dark days. I don't know how dark they were, but they were pretty busy and pretty absorbing. But what did happen, what God did do, is He threw opportunities for us that we weren't looking for to help people around, and we just couldn't say no to some of those, and so our kids were thrown into those situations too. And I think that's really where, for those guys, they saw it happening. We didn't say this is something you're going to do, it'll be good for you, and we weren't looking for it. It's not a decision we made other than, and it was usually in the context of some sort of church setting, but it wasn't a formal mission project or anything like that. It was just people who needed help. And so we did a couple of those, and I think that whets the appetite, not just for the children, but their parents sometimes, to be able to see beyond the horizons of the family and say, God's given us gifts. It doesn't seem like enough for us to live on, but somehow when we open up our homes and our lives to other people, our lives get richer, not poorer. So there were a couple, not many of those, but some when the kids were little that paved the way to another sort of a broader vision for it. One of those was a formal one. You know, we were minding our own business when the youth pastor came to our, said, I need to come over, and we let him in. Never let a youth pastor in your house. But he came in and said, something like this, God wants you to go to Australia. And, we're organizing a mission. We have a family in Australia, and it's a missionary family, and Stony Point's sending a team, and you should be on it. And we laughed and said, I don't think so,
Our kids were 4 to 12 or so at that.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. We didn't say yes the first night, but we did pray about it, and we did go. And that was really our introduction to formal missions in terms of participating. And our kids didn't go, but it really changed the culture of our family in a big way.
Did you take your kids with you, or did you?
No, we didn't.
We had grandmothers who so kindly came.
Yeah. Which points out the fact that if you're going to do, I think it starts with the parents having missionary hearts and setting an example. Our kids. The other big thing is growing up at Stone. Our kids mostly grew up at Stony Point Church, and where there's a culture of missions, and I often kid about our kids who are very missions oriented. They don't know. They never lived in a universe that wasn't missions oriented, so they were already sort of saturated with that, and they had examples like Jindy that it was just normal. For them, for me it was weird to do missions. For my kids, thank God, they would think it's weird. And that's not to our credit, but to the credit of a church culture that really prizes that and gives positive examples and kind of just expects it. And the kids are not. It involves the kids, even from young ages, families, the kids. So I don't know if that's a start, but there's our start.
Yeah, that's a great start, and I think maybe it would be appropriate to say nothing that is going to be said here. We would say, is there any credit here? God has sovereignly moved to create all these opportunities and to create any desire whatsoever in our hearts to do these things. So we'll just put that out there as a blanket statement.
And it's really true for us.
Okay. Could I ask if you were to do it all over again, and you could start, and you had kids who were, Vivian's age, would you have done it differently, knowing what you know now? Would you have done anything differently?
I think I was thinking a little differently than he was to start. I think we did both have models in our parents. His parents were school teachers both, and kind of a serving profession. But my father was, he raised a big garden in Virginia Beach, the city. And he always raised enough to give it to all the neighbors too. And so, for
squash especially.
Squash. But even
it takes one plant.
But from an early age, I think, I saw my father especially just being very generous all the time. And so, just to say that anything you do start in your family can go for generations, really does, I think, get passed down. One of the first things we did before Australia was we were at a different church, and the minister asked us if we would have this young man come live with us that was having some difficulty. He was married and had a baby. No, they weren't married and had a baby. And so, we kind of said, well, yeah, okay. And we kicked Joshua out of his bedroom and let this guy stay there. And, in the middle of the night, I'm laying there like, what are we doing? We don't know this guy from Adam. He could get up and be an axe murderer. What do we know? He's sleeping in my house with my children. And that was the beginning of kind of like, okay, Lord, this has to be you, because it can't be me, because I'm a scaredy cat. So that was probably the first kind of thing that we did that was outside of my comfort zone. And, you got through that for a couple of weeks, and then I guess did Australia. But what I would say with our kids is it wasn't ever really a question, do you want to do this? It was, this is what our family's doing. It was kind of, oh, we can go do the soup kitchen. Oh, let's do that Saturday. Oh, we can, so it wasn't a forced thing. It was just, and more so with our younger ones, I think, than with Zach, maybe. We kind of got in more of a groove. But you know, like Michael said, they you know, they just kind of did it, and then they got, you know, the rewards of the good feeling and the smiles from the people, and, you know, talked to homeless people that you don't usually do in your suburban lifestyle, and those kinds of things that we did. Set them up. You know, we used to go to, where did we go? Pennsylvania. To, Operation Care Bear.
Was it mobilization?
No, it was Care Bear.
Anyway, we'd get on a bus at 4 in the morning. I mean, a lot of you guys did this, and drive for 6 hours to go fill boxes to send to Russia. And I mean, the kids just thought it was the greatest thing, and you kind of think they don't know they're riding on the bus for 6 hours, and, you know, and you hugged these bears and prayed for the child who was going to get them, and, you know, put gospel bead necklaces on them, and, you know, it was like they just kind of grew up thinking this is the greatest thing, and so, you know, as you do it as a family, and I think I'll say this, it's really important for the dad to be the leader in this, because I think especially if you have sons, they see this isn't just a girly thing.
When you're hugging bears, especially.
Unless they're real, that's kind of bad.
Yeah.
But you also had to, you know, like put that plastic stuff around,
There were
you know,
some manly
boxes. There were manly things
Yeah.
to do. But, you know, I really do think that has a big impact when the dads say, this is what we're doing on Saturday. You know.
And doing that kind of thing in the context of teams and with friends makes all the difference in the
That's what I
world
was going
too.
to say. With these families, you know, our kid, they don't just did it. It was like, are you going? Of course. Because they had the, you know, the peer group from church that was kind of a church thing to do. I think that made a big difference. Or the modeling from the older ones to younger ones, you know, going places.
We would have started earlier.
Yeah. Have you thought about it?
Well, we're waiting on God, so it's all good.
We're not second guessing God. I was just curious.
Like,
Okay, that's great. Thank you. We'll have a time for questions and stuff, but we're just going to let our guest speakers start, and then we'll do questions. So, Deebos.
I guess I'm starting. You know, a lot of what they said I think is really true, just being in that kind of environment. I mean, they do what their peers do. If your family is all about sports, your kids are probably going to do sports. They're all about music, you're going to do music. But I think just, you know, be involved in that. I haven't done a lot of trips or anything, but we've done lots of things through the church. And I think it's kind of a stepped process, too, as you were saying. You start at a small level, low level, when they're young, and then kind of build up. I mean, I remember one trip we had, one of the best ones I remember, was one gleaning. And took a whole group of kids to an old fruit farm, apple farm, up around Orange County or something like that. And we all picked apples for the day.
off the ground.
Yeah. Well, that was the funny part. I remember a lot of it wasn't off me. You looked up and there's kids in the trees, everything. Oh my gosh. You know, we're going to take half of them back and cast and stuff like that. That was one thing. And they just, I mean, it was partially about making it fun for them too. So they kind of progressed that way. I think maybe one of the biggest things is just asking God to give you kids who have a heart for it. I mean, I know, I think especially our oldest two, really all three of them, but and they just wanted to do it. And I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I know it comes from God. I mean, we tried to foster it, but Jessica especially, she's just always had a heart for going. And she was 14 when she first went, 15 when she went to India for 10 weeks or something. It seemed like 10. 8 weeks, and I don't know that you can teach that so much. You just have to have a heart for it, and mentors too. I mean, Jessica went because Sarah, their eldest, had gone to the same ministry, Teen Missions, and you know, you go through 2 weeks. You guys familiar with Teen Missions at all? I mean, there's some good things, less good things about it, but they start off with 2 weeks on an island that's. We visited there one time, and after 10 minutes, I couldn't wait to get off. The mosquitoes are like this big. I mean, it's just barely an exaggeration. and they do 2 weeks of training there before they go out.
Boot camp?
Boot camp, yeah. I mean, they're up at what, 5:36, something like that. 3 minutes to get ready, all those kinds of things. So, they just have a heart for it. And, what else would you?
I think one of the things was the fact that, like Michael was saying, it's the environment in the church as much as anything. Lindsay started writing to Jindy early on just because, she knew you were a missionary. It's something that they started through the Sunday school, and it really piqued her interest. But, just doing things as a family and as a group. I mean, when I say family, I mean the larger family, not just our family unit, but within the church. And, I grew up in West Virginia, so I grew up about an hour outside of Fairmont. So my kids saw a lot of need early on in their lives because we would go home to visit West Virginia, and the people around where I grew up were very poor. And I grew up on a farm, so they saw the thing that Cindy was talking about with my parents giving to the people around them. And I think maybe that was the first time they saw anything like that. And but then when you move away from your extended family and the church becomes your extended family, if you don't have relatives here in town, which was our case, Starting Point became our extended family, and it was just like getting together with the cousins on the weekend when you go do these activities together. And it wasn't about, it was about learning to serve the Lord and see others outside of yourself and see them as more important, and serving in that way. But it was also just a whole lot of fun. And that's what I think from the earliest stages really piques that interest and exposes them to things that causes them to then think, and take that path that's going to open up doors where they're going to really think more about missions and how Christ is involved in all of that.
I would suggest maybe two other things. One is, if I can remember both, one is just really emphasizing, Arthur's played a role in it. Certainly you guys played a major role. You were leading a lot of stuff that kind of helped develop. But the other thing I think too is just not being afraid to let them go.
Yeah.
And we have known parents who just didn't want their kids to go. And even when they didn't, kind of hid that or just trusted God, because when you send your kid off to, say Jessica's been to, Lindsay's been to Uganda twice with the church, and Jessica's been 2 summers in India, and then the Middle East. She just got back from the Middle East this spring.
Lindsay did Belize as well.
Yeah, Lindsay did Belize and a few other things sprinkled. I can't remember what's what now, but if you discourage them, they're going to jump back pretty quickly. And even when you're like, my child is going to spend 8 weeks going through India with this team of people I've never met. I got to trust the leader who knows what he and she are doing. They're eating who knows what, and when she got back, we found out a few things she did eat. Even though they took their own food, they sampled a lot of things that were on 4 legs.
I just ate goat last week.
Yeah. Well.
Along those lines, I think Christine would attest to this as well. I think for me it was harder to get on board when God called my child to go. It was easy to send Lindsay to Uganda because I had people going with her who were going to take care of her. But when my middle daughter decided to go out of the country and I didn't know anybody on the team, that took a stretch of faith. So it's as much about God working in our lives as it is our kids' lives. Because it took me a while to work through, but once I got on board, I was fine with it. And it was like God gave us the peace to let her go. That's a hard first step, the first time you go through something like that. But don't think it means that God's closing the door.
And I just think I use Jessica's examples. She kind of moved up from West Virginia and some other things to taking a big jump to going to India. But it's kind of neat, and if you come to hear them speak, you hear about it. But I think we were both very impressed. She came back from this Middle East trip, Campus Crusade, but they had to move countries about 3 or 4 weeks before they left because where they were supposed to go became quite unstable. They went to another country that they hadn't done work in before. Long story short, all the planning the group had for this one location was thrown out the window, and they ended up just going to a city that they'd never taken a group to before. They only knew of maybe half a dozen Christians in the city that they're aware of, and they ended up pretty much doing street ministry. they went out, and you can't just talk to people, but you just go out and they would just go out and meet people. So they'd say, where are the students? What, we want to, we're Americans, we want to get to know people here. And they would just start talking to people, say, hey, can we sit down and have coffee, or can we have lunch? And then of course the Middle Eastern hospitality culture, I mean, they got invited to homes, they got invited to a wedding, and they just did ministry that way. And to me it was so impressive I'd be terrified to do it. And not only that, but they were kind of going back and forth between 3 languages as they did it. Nobody really knowing all of one, that the other person knew anyway. Because Jessica knows some Arabic, and a lot of people there knew some English, and there's some French sprinkled in. So that I'm just saying it because going from a very controlled environment, working up to where they could literally just 2 and 3 college students going out, meet people, and
and all that's for the parents, so the parents can kind of ramp up.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah. Anyway, that's all I'm doing.
Okay, right there.
Well, I said our oldest Sarah is the one who's probably done the most, I think, as far as overseas mission. And so when she was at her house yesterday, I was telling her about this meeting and asked her, so what do you think? And she said, well, Mom, let's face it, it was really more Dad than you. Because, he has always had a heart for missions, a heart for evangelism. And, I'm a mom who likes to keep her little chicks close to home, quite honestly. So it was a huge step of faith for me to let her go. She started going when she was 12, and she went with Teen Missions, and she went back with Teen Missions 4 times. She went at 12, at 14, 16, and again at 18. And we never saw Teen Missions until her last year that she went. And when we went on that property, I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe she wants to come back here.
It is rugged.
It is. They live in, in the middle of summer in tents and bathe with buckets. And it's
this
very.
This is in Florida.
This is in Florida. But the particular team she went on, she always they go all around the world. She always picked teams where they bathed with a bucket and lived in a tent. So. Anyhow.
They simulate third world living conditions at this camp to acclimate you to what you might be faced. So.
Right. So.
But the rest of the kids, the whole family was there on this last trip, and Jimmy's like, let's ditch her, Dad. Let's get out of here. They wanted to get out of there.
And you have people say, so when are you guys going to come? And that's just not their idea. They've done different things. They've all done West Virginia, and Sarah always did West Virginia in between her trips overseas. She was in Ecuador and then 2 different countries of Africa. But and she still has a heart for missions. She's married now, and I think she uses her nursing as an area of missions in her life. So, and the trips she would go on, and I think Jeanette had some of that too, but her very last trip, I heard nothing. The whole 8 weeks she was gone. They were so remote. There was no mail that came back and forth. And you just had to trust that the Lord was taking care of them. And if something bad happened, that's when you'd find out, so then you'd hear the good when they came home. But I would say, she was a challenging child to raise. She has an adventurous spirit, a bold spirit, very independent, and she, when she went at 12, there was a part of me that was like, glad to have her gone for a few weeks. But it changed her dramatically when she came home. She was a new person. She'd always been a Christian, but just a new perspective on life that's never changed, never gone back. And so I know I was raised with a mom who had a very servant's heart. She didn't really do overseas missions, but she traveled the world just with my dad's company. And so she just always served people, and we always had international people in our home. because of just their traveling, and they had lived overseas themselves. So, you know, I think that's always been our approach, to have our home very open for other people to be there and welcoming. And, you know, we had somebody stay with us for a period, a homeless person stay with us for a period of time. We were talking about that, whether we would talk about that or not, but, you know, he came and lived with us for a couple of weeks, and we just helped him in a tight patch, and our kids were there. And, you know, I thought the same thing. You know, what are we doing? We don't know anything about this man. And that was probably 10 years ago. And, you know, Hugh is still, I mean, he kind of disappeared again, but he's resurfaced, and Hugh has a relationship with him now. And, you know, he's in ministry himself. I mean, he barely keeps a roof over his head, but he loves the Lord. So, you know, that's something that our kids have seen ongoing as well. And, you know, I know Misha loves Mr. B and helps him. That's a way that she serves at church.
Used to.
I know. She's going on to college. So. But my part was just to be willing to let them go, I would say.
And that's a big part.
Which was really hard.
Many tears.
What you were saying, it's a culture in your church home, and we started at Stony Point in '89, and so we were spiritual retards too. You know, it was kind of a new thing. I was raised in the church, but you know, I didn't really become a believer till I was, you know, in my mid-20s. So, but that culture, you know, when your kids are integrated in it, they get a taste of that, and
there's an experience
they
of God
respond to it.
And there's an experience of God in it with everything else. That once you have it, you want some more of that.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, when I was talking to Sarah about it yesterday, because this is something I remembered. I didn't know whether she remembered it too, but she brought this memory up. We went to a PCA church in Florida. We lived outside of Tampa, and they, you know, had a missionary come and speak, and I still remember she just being really fascinated with that. And then, you know, Hugh saying, well, that is something you can do something. And she brought it up yesterday that she still distinctly remembers that. She was, I don't know, maybe first grade. I mean, it was no more than second grade because we were only there her kindergarten, first and second grade. So it was at that time that something, you know, spoke to her heart that she wanted to do that someday. And then it was Kathy Grossman that was here, and she had gone to teen missions and had volunteered down there several summers, and she spoke about it a couple different times, and she was just a leader. And so she had said, I would love to see some child from our church go, and she brought a video back. And Sarah was in, what, 8th grade, 7th grade, something like that, and Hugh got it from Kathy and brought it home, and, you know, we put it in, and they show all this stuff about teen missions. And I'm sitting there being horrified. I would never want to do that. I mean, they're falling into water that I'm thinking there's alligators everywhere. Because, you know, I went to college down there, and I was always terrified of the bugs and snakes and stuff. And so while I'm watching that, I'm thinking, oh, that just looks awful. You know, Sarah's sitting there thinking, I want to do that. So it spoke to her somehow. That was, you know, amazing.
So those relationships with Kathy and with Jindy, and those being mentored by older adults that have been there and done that, you know, that's a huge factor.
Yeah.
So.
I can tell you from the West Virginia team too, because so many adults go and the youth, the relationships that the kids have built with those adults at Stony Point, Mr. Ellis and Mrs. Ellis and, you know, Hugh and different dads and moms that have gone, you know, that's that mentoring too. You know, you're taking a week of your vacation, a week off from work to come do this, really speaks to the kids. I think that's a great way to have that intergenerational modeling.
Denisons.
You want us to maybe...
Yeah.
hopefully I'm gonna do it that way. Yeah, well, I just wanted to get started. Sarah had sent us a little email with a couple prompts about, what should we talk about? And I read that, and kind of in between the lines was, give us the roadmap, give us the roadmap to the destination. And, there's no roadmap. And like you guys said, we really feel like, it's one of those survival trips where they drop you in the middle of Minnesota with nothing. You have to find your way out. And that's kind of what it is with raising these kids. And you encounter these scary barriers, and sometimes you have great survival skills and build confidence. Anyway, our story is a lot different than the Stony Point people because we're not part of the Stony Point family. We've been in the church for a year, but we both got saved in college. Didn't know each other until we were Christians, right before we graduated. We always joked that was probably a good thing that we didn't know each other when we were here. But,
I liked it.
And so this is the early 80s. We're coming into charismatic churches. Our life revolved around Acts 1:8. And you will receive power when the Holy Ghost comes on you. And you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the other ends of the earth. But that really kind of undergirded, our Christian walk was just about, more experiential, more outward focus. The church focus, building a local church, that was kind of in the background. A lot of it was just more outward, more aggressive. So our story's a little bit different because we didn't have the benefit of the church culture there. So there's lots of things. I think Karen made a list, and ours was just like shotgun. It's just, how do we do that, Lord? Let's try this, try this, try this.
And it was very humbling to be asked to share, because I'm sure everyone who was asked to share thinking we did so poorly in comparison to how worthy the Lord is and how reluctant I was. I mean, you do 100 things different in retrospect, but in His mercy, it was actually quite fun. We started brainstorming kind of, well, what exactly have we actually done over the years? And so I kind of categorized it. She talked about early years, later years, and so the early years, I'm kind of tracking with my first three now. The latter ones had to just do whatever stage whatever we were doing at the time. We were kind of tracking with the big guys, and I called those early years, I called that setting the stage, because we were mostly at home. We had a lot of kids. You couldn't go out and do a whole lot. And the kids don't have vivid memories of those times, but we took a lot of pictures. I never had an expensive camera. I didn't know how to scrapbook. But I did take a lot of pictures of everything we did, and I put them in kid-friendly albums that were always low to the ground, so the kids read them all through the years, and so they kind of they remember all the stuff we've done by looking at the photos. And so, there's a picture of you, raking the widow's yard. You remember Mrs. Yates, right? And they're like, yeah, I remember Mrs. Yates, because they've seen the photos so many times. Or there you are when the Afghani missionary came to dinner, and we all sat on the floor and ate with our hands, and you remember that? And so I call that just setting the stage. And it was also a big preparation time for me, because unlike some of your testimonies, my family was not generous. My parents are very old. I was the last in a big family, and Depression era folks. Everything was very much for our family, so I had no modeling of ever sharing, ever being generous. So this was a really important time for me just to start to break out of that bondage of never giving, never sharing. So this man is the giver in the family, so he's brought me along. During those years, we sponsored children through CCF and other things, so the kids got to write letters and exchange photos. Somehow we got into housing girls in crisis pregnancy. So over about a 2-year period, 6 girls lived with us. And that was really good. Yeah, one at a time. And they all didn't stay their whole pregnancy. Sometimes they'd go back to their families or things like that. But that was really good for me. I'd never hardly even knew any African Americans, much less live in my home for periods of time. So that was really a good breaking out time. couldn't get out to serve the homeless, but we would prepare food, the kids and I, rolling potatoes and the foil around them, and we'd prepare the food and then bring it to others who didn't have toddlers and babies and let them go take food to the homeless. Like I said, we cared for the widows and the neighbors. We would find a widow on our street or a single woman, and we would get out there, and it would be our project to do their yard or just visit celebrations and stuff. Ginter Hall's down the street. We had a regular visitation time at Ginter Hall where we would go, and they like visits. Missionaries, because of the church culture we're in, there was a lot of missionaries that came into town, and they would stay at our house for a meal or a week or 2 weeks, so the kids would get used to having our home open that way. And then Walk for Life, we thought of that. We did that a couple of times. That was a lot of fun. You can do that with strollers and stuff. And then, do you have any comments on those years left? The middle years, the kids are increasingly starting to participate. That was a time of really wide open doors in our home. Learning to prepare for hospitality and giving away our time and money. Alan was in college ministry during those years. He reduced his work as an engineer, so he was down at VCU. So that was really great for the boys, because the boys got to participate in what Alan was doing to college students, and what is more cool to a middle school boy than to get to go on camping trips and see other people's faith really come alive. So those are really cool years for the kids. And I guess because we were down at VCU, we learned about international students. So for 3 years, we hosted international students. I guess someone from Madagascar and Ecuador and Korea. And that basically involves, if anyone's ever interested in that, it's like a meal in your home every now and then, and do events with them. So the kids got to see a lot of action that way. And Audrey was teasing. She said, have you ever had a group this big in your home before? And I had to laugh, because we hosted small group at the church we were in previous to this, and for 8 or 10 years, every week, this was what we did. So every week. So the kids really got used to the doors are open. There's people in our home. In 10 minutes, okay, you hit the bathrooms, you hit this, you get the ice, you chain the dog, we could pull it together. So those were stretching times, but very good. Just get over the fact that your stuff gets trashed. You get over whatever you have hang-ups about your home, you kind of get over that when you just open the doors and let people come in all the time. And the girls would do mother's helpering, baking for neighbors, free stuff, Special Olympics. That's fun to do as a family. You can sign up and go and help do Special Olympics. So those were kind of the middle years. The later years, I called, the kids were totally hands-on, because we get to go out of the home now. We're not always having to just be at home doing stuff. And the kids are increasingly getting to choose or not whether they participate. Some of this other stuff they didn't get to choose. People are in our home. We're all going to Special Olympics. But now they are getting to pick and choose. And like you say, that's when the rubber meets the road. Are they going to choose to do it? Or are they going to say this has been a, huge, waste or whatever. But happily, the kids are choosing to continue. So as the kids were getting older, they were getting very involved in church, nursery, youth leadership, etc., outreaches. We got involved with a Feeding the Homeless program where we could all go and prepare the food and take it to Monroe Park. So that was a great summer. We did that. And then the mission trips and outreach, just numbers of places. Alan and Robert, that was particularly good after Hurricane Katrina, got to go on a building trip to New Orleans and different things. We had a lot of, for some reason, our community group that I've referred to had a lot of people die. It was a very sad thing, but we got to care for a lot of grieving families, and the kids got to do so too, doing home maintenance and cleaning people's homes and preparing meals. So that was, although it was sad time for all of us, but the kids got to grow in that capacity. And then lastly of this period is Chat. We've been involved with Chat for a couple of years. We've discovered that they will accept whole families like us. They go down to Chat each week, and even down to Michael was only 11 when he started, but even he could tutor a preschooler. So we've been doing that for a couple of years. And it's fun to watch, as you say, the older kids, as they've gotten older, they're folding out of our home now, but they're continuing to choose to get involved a lot with the city, RCLI, and the homeless. my 22-year-old yesterday. He was home convalescing from an injury, and he said, I think I'm going to go pray for the homeless. So he went down to Monroe Park, you know, that was his idea of how to spend an afternoon. So it's very humbling to when your kids do make choices that way. Do I have just a minute more?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Well, we started to think, this was where we really had to brainstorm, because one thing when it just happened, you don't even, unless you had asked us to do this, we wouldn't even recognize that, you know, all the steps and all the things that have gone on, because it's just been family life. But as we started to distill it, what is it that, you know, what are the factors that made this possible for us? And I think the top one was just making it a priority. Serving others was always just kind of on our to-do list. This man is geared for service, and like I said, I'm a late bloomer coming along here, but so because we did home educate our kids, we had a lot more time in our schedule. We could choose what we did, and we could do something at Thursday at 1, you know, so that we could plan around it. But even now, it's really hard to continue service as a priority as the kids get older, to land hard. Like Tuesday night is chat night. We're going to go to chat. And so for everyone to clear their jobs, when you know, their babysitting schedules, their sports schedules, it just seems like everything comes against you. If you try to land hard on any service your family wants to do, anticipate it being very difficult, because the one our son signed up for basketball, you write in big letters, we cannot practice Tuesday night. You know, you send in your registration, you get it back. Practices are all on Tuesday, all games on Tuesday night. What are you going to do? That was hard. We dropped the league, and God provided a better one. He had a great season. But those are hard things, because it just seems like it doesn't come easily. So first was making a priority, and secondly was taking the initiative and not waiting for others to organize it. We weren't in a church where every time you open the bulletin, there's something cool that you can participate in. We were basically just had to find out. You hear people talking at work, you're reading the newspaper, you hear something in the radio, and you realize there's something, Special Olympics, we can do that, you know. So it took a lot of just doing it. You hear about it, hit their website, find out if you can do it. And so that's kind of how service happened for us. And then the third one is just making tough choices to retain your time, your freedom, and your family schedule, and your money. And these decisions were not popular with the kids. These are the hard ones, because sports, we chose to keep our kids at a lower level sport than maybe their athletic ability would allow them to do. All our kids are athletic. And until high school, we let them go a little further in high school. But that was tough, because coaches are very aggressive, and if you have athletic children, I thought one lady said it the best. She came to me, this is after my daughter was taking ballet, very little. Give me your daughter when she's 8. Give her to me. So she was, she was somewhat kidding, but she was saying, give me your time, give me your family schedule, give me your money. I'm going to dictate what happens in this child's life, because she has talent. So, and we had a lot of aggressive coaches over the year that want to take your kid to the next level, and the next level, and the next level, and pretty soon you don't have any weekends in town. So, and that's not to say if you choose that it's bad. It's just that if your kid's involved with drama and sports and scouts, there's too many things in your schedule to do anything consistently. And especially recently, we've been thinking a lot about if it's sustainable, whatever you choose to do, it's easier that you don't have to recreate it all the time. If it's going every week and you can plug in, it's a little easier that way. Media, we chose for a long time to keep media very, 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 very low key in our home, so that entertainment wasn't our top priority and our top fallback on. It's the easiest thing to do. So, probably crazily so, we didn't have a TV for a long time, just because we thought that's just a distraction from what we were doing. And so I don't recommend that necessarily. That might have been overboard, but that's just what we did. But it forces you to find people to spend time with. And or to read great books aloud about people who are doing great things for God. So
I would say take that and try to get rid of your neighbors' TVs too.
yes. Oh no, but that's where we went when we wanted to watch a movie.
Okay.
We had to have the movie. The neighbors get to be the weirdest going, my kid's not.
Thank God for the
Can we
big,
watch
yeah. Thank God for the big screens. Now you don't even have to go over. You can just put it on.
There you go. Best of both worlds. And the last under making tough choices was our budget. There was always a line item in our budget for giving besides tithing. So there was just that understanding that this money is for whatever the Lord lays on our heart, whether it's planned or spontaneous, but that just kept us free from, you know, using everything, as there's just always money to be done. So that was kind of the way we see service unfolding in our family.
Let me just add one thing to the opportunity to work with college kids. And, you know, part of this we're talking about, you know, working with your kids and finding opportunities for them, but part of it is finding out what your passion is too, because they really come behind that. You know, when you're passionate and something you really enjoy doing, they see your enjoyment in it, and then that they just kind of benefit vicariously from that. And, so my time working with college kids, I just love that age group. But then, you know, there was a season that just set that all aside. But now they're all college age with friends, and so their friends come over here, and I get to spend
very
time with them.
open.
Yeah. But that was an opportunity for the kids to see me doing something that I really like to do. So it's not always just trying to figure out, you know, what can benefit my kids right now. Some of it's just, you know, what can I do that I really enjoy doing in the Lord. The kids see that.
Well, I'm sure that you all are very inspired like I am. Let's just kind of open up the floor to questions. Nothing is off limits. And anyone who wants to respond to the question, unless you want to direct it somewhere. I have one. You did talk a little bit about what happens when the kids are resistant. Like, so you've come up with this great plan, and no, you know, some of your children are interested because they're responding to your interest, and then some of them would just rather do anything else. Like, when did you insist? Like, any of you, when did you insist?
I can give you one example, I think, because, you know, we're not trying to force your kids into a mold to benefit how you feel about yourself as a Christian. You know? So that's where you have to maybe use some wisdom, because you don't want to give them a knee-jerk reaction where, you know, I've been forced to do this and I hated it. But you just get some surprising good teaching moments, you know, when they don't want to do things. When we were in the feeding program down at Monroe Park, you know, two of the areas that homeless people really struggle with are their hands and their teeth. And our 15-year-old, you know, when she would have to hand them the sandwiches, and they would have their fingers, she'd come back, she'd go, "Oh, Dad, your fingers are grossing me out. I can't do that anymore." So, you know, we just start to talk about what it's like to be homeless. But we didn't force her to do it. You know, 15-year-old, you know, I didn't want her to come home and have dreams, and somehow that turned into a negative experience. So sometimes, yeah, you just have to ask yourself, why am I going to make her do it?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Anybody else want to speak to that?
We were trying to make our kids not do stuff. Right? Sure, God's calling you. There's something that Alan said that resonated with me was you can't leapfrog from discipleship to missions. There's ministry in between almost always. When I see any of us growing at a missionary heart, it's like it springboards off of involvement in ministry, where God helps you see a gift, helps you discover a gift, and grow in it, in safe environment of the church, and then He thrusts you into using those same gifts with people who aren't believing as a witness to them and as a draw in. And I think when kids are operating sort of in that, it's natural for them to want to do the things they're gifted in. I think sometimes parents make a mistake of trying to get kids to do things where their gifts aren't. And I think you have to really play the cards, gift cards that God has given you, and be creative and be flexible as parents and say, you know, if you got 6 kids, you know, we're not all going to be, you know, it's not one size fits all with missions. But if you can sort of use the diversity of the gifts in a particular project or a couple of projects, then I think, and have those kids have opportunities in the church to grow in them so that they have confidence that when they go out, they won't fall so terribly. I think those are 2 big things.
And one thing I feel is just empathizing with some of the emotions they feel. We definitely would not have been able to do chat tutoring this consistently unless Alan were doing it. He would come home, I would tease, he'd come home and pat down all the excuses. You're well, let me see, yeah, you can get your homework done later, you know. He just kind of would smooth down everybody's reason why they couldn't go to chat that night. But, and then we would all get in the car and go. But there were times when I had difficulties being at chat, when they really did smell and they were licking my hands and I didn't like that. And for me just to process with them how I can see some of the adverse things that they are experiencing in some of our service opportunities and just kind of share with them how the Lord was meeting me. God really met me powerfully as I was having kind of a crisis time thinking this is really too much. 40-some-year-old woman, I just can't bridge this gap. This is too much. But God really turned my heart in hope after I spent time with them and to share with them, this is what God's doing in my heart to change it. I felt like it just, I mean, I don't know it's going to help them every time, but it kind of brings them alongside. We're all in process. Yeah, I'm an adult. I don't scream and kick when Daddy says it's time to go to chat. But inside.
On the outside, anyway.
Right, but I understand how you're feeling, and so we work through it together, all of our negative reactions to giving our life away. We all have it, we just react differently, so just talking.
So you can learn a lot from your kids too. My kids have given me a lot of courage. One of the first times we went to West Virginia and stayed at the camp we were building, there was no electricity, no running water, porta potties, and mice. And I just don't do mice very well. So we're sleeping on the floor of the cabin on blow-up air mattresses, and we can hear the mice. And I remember Hannah Murphy going, "Mrs. B, do you hear that?" I'm like, "Yes, I do." And we're all holding our mattresses over. So the next year, I took a little tent. I thought I was really smart, so I set my little tent up inside the cabin that I could zip shut. And the girls made so much fun of me. But Kristen Dahlstrand, said, "Miss B, I found a verse just for you when we're sleeping in our tents." So, but and they laughed at me and they teased me, but they accepted me too, and they were so courageous. I mean, I kept saying, "You guys can have the mice. I need a good night's sleep." But, my kids have encouraged me to say, "Mom, you can do this. Come along, you can do this." There are times when you say, "This is out of my comfort zone." But,
remember that Stephen Curtis Chapman song, "Saddle Up Your Horses"? I think that song was kind of on the radio back when, and that was a theme song for us. That, our lives were pretty boring and pretty vanilla middle class, but God drew us into an adventure, and once you get a taste of that, mice or no mice, you're down for the struggle.
And we have a friend from West Virginia that did music every year, John Linville, country guy, big old hat, and he would say, and has said with the cancer he has now that's killing him, it's just another adventure in Jesus. So, we kind of say that with our family sometimes, and it's something like, this looks pretty tough, but,
There's a whole lot of loving and being loved, as you know, in missions. And I think for our kids, that was a place they wanted to be. As they built relationships and as they felt people loving the people that were working with them, but also the people that we go to serve have always loved us better than we've loved them.
Yeah, the one thing I can think of is just that I'll speak for our kids, not your kids, but don't necessarily expect, you hear about the highlight, and it sounds like it's this upward trajectory that everything's, oh my gosh, they started with gleaning and now they're doing missions, to the toughest people in the world. And yet, I know with our kids, they've had some real ups and downs, and and even some major issues, stumbles, that you would think, how could this kid who has loved the Lord possibly do this? And you know, that didn't disqualify them from the kingdom. And God, in this one case I'm thinking of, really used it to propel the child even further. It was a long, even year plus of terrible time for us and her, but came out of it much stronger. So I don't want to make things sound like it was like just straight up, you know, and that's not how we are, and that's not how our kids are. You know, they're going to fail. I mean, our kids are going to fail. I'm not yours, but ours.
Well, and out of the failure, you know, when you're going on missions and you're trying to share God's grace and you're trying to teach people about, you know, grace, and once you fail and you fail miserably, and everybody knows it, it's a tough place to be, but you experience the grace you're trying to tell others about in a way that you've never experienced it, which in the long run is going to increase their ability to minister throughout their lives. So
I was going to say my second child is completely different from Sarah. His first trip to West Virginia was very negative. He had he's more introverted and quiet, and I think likes home more. And it was really, really hard for him to be. And it wasn't that he was young, but he struggled. I mean, he cried every night. He called home, and probably wasn't a great thing, but one of the leaders took pity on him, and he let him call home every night, and he just cried on the phone. It was excruciating for me. But, you know, and so you think, well, you want all your kids to have this passion. But I would say, you know, he's gone again. He didn't go immediately. There was a few years that he did not want to go, but he has gone. And then, you know, this year he's 22, and he didn't go because he's got an internship. But, you know, when they left and he said, I wish I was going. You know, he really wanted to go. So, and, you know, that's the thing, is each of your children has their own individual story. And, you know, they're not cookie cutters. And I have to know that God is working through each one of my children individually for who they are.
And there's a real spiritual battle going on. I mean, you guys all know that, but just, you know how it hits when you're doing something. Just because it's your kid doing it and not you, there's just as much backlash, and there's plenty of attack that, you know, falls on everyone in the family, I think. I mean, we've seen that.
Satan really is.
Really clearly.
Yeah.
And I think we're pretty convinced that, you know, some of the things kids have gone through was Satan was trying to keep them from what God was calling them to, or is calling them to.
How about some of you who have younger kids? Any thoughts or questions?
I have one. I was wondering if, for those of you who've raised your children and have been involved in missions, you know, have you had? You mentioned how Sarah changed a lot after her first trip with teen missions. That was pretty seminal in her spiritual growth. But have you had any experiences where a child that, and I struggle with this because, you know, when you raise children in the church, a lot of times they don't really know what they have, you know. I didn't grow up in the church, so my perspective is a little different than my children, and I'm concerned that they take so much for granted, and one of the ways it gets them outside of what they, you know, experience is, I think, doing these kinds of things. And I'm challenged by it, but I guess my question is, have you had any of your children, as a result of service or a result of mission, that was the thing that really turned them on, and that their faith actually became real and not just intellectual?
I would definitely. Yeah, the first time Megan went to Uganda, you know, she came home. She was in college at UVA. She came home just a really changed person. You know, looking at material things, looking at, you know, fellow students, just like, you know, what are we doing here? What, you know, what is life really about? And it fades, you know, over time. But I think that's, gosh, the greatest benefit with teenagers especially is, you know, they see how other people really live. that not everybody lives in the suburban world that so many of us here do. They, you know, they see the needs, and they see, you know, one thing when you go to West Virginia, the pastor there says, you know, you're going into grandma's house. Don't think you're going to, you know, change grandma. And so, you know, we'd go to these houses that were just full of stuff on top of stuff. And we'd take all that stuff out and, you know, paint the walls or do the floor or do a ceiling, and then we'd put it all back. We'd wash it, but we'd put it all back. You know, and the kids, it was just a respect, and it was things that were junk to us were dear to, you know, this person, and because we began to love this person. You know, I know at one house we had this old lady, 82, seemed old, and Sam put ceilings up. You know, before she had like, I don't know, what did she had? Glued on something. And he put real ceilings, drywall. And I walked her in, and her eyes welled up with tears, and she said, I never thought I'd have ceilings without lines. And just cried, you know, and the kids saw that, and the kids were like, you know, we came up here and, you know, a week out of our life, and gosh, we made a real difference in this lady's life. And it makes a big difference. You know, they're all changed. They can hardly not be changed, I think, by the things that they do. And you know, you don't have to, more is caught than taught, you know. They're there, they're doing it, they're seeing it, they're feeling it, you know.
She did complain during the middle of the week, because when you do sheetrock, you have a lot of lines, especially when we do sheetrock. It's somebody took her in there midweek, and we were so proud of what we'd done. She looked up and said, "This is not what I had in mind." She did not want it at all, and she didn't understand the process.
She was a little irritated. She's the same lady who found a revolver under her pillow.
So you took care of those lines.
By the end of the week, it was all good. But the next week in Fairmont, one of the things we try to do is go back and visit the host families. And we went to this lady's house the next year, and she was, I think it was the next summer, she was bedridden, and they had moved her out of her bedroom into this room. And so her last days were spent, you know, looking at that ceiling. And what we hope, what we try to say is, you know, this is the love of Christ for you right here. And for our kids, Jim, I think faith, you know, sort of hitting life, even for our kids, has been very important.
Well, I know Nisha has written to one of the Carolyners, who her faithfully throughout the year. So she was looking forward to seeing her.
And one of the ladies that the kids have worked on her home many times, what, 6 years maybe, and she always cooked a big meal for them, homemade stuff, died just a few weeks ago. They were supposed to work on her house this week. And the kids were just so upset, you know, and the ones that I talked to, because they had a relationship with her. I think it can be. It's hard if it's just missions where you drop in, do it, and drop out, you know. We're just here to help you because we've got more than you've got. But if there's a relationship, you know, it's ongoing. You know, you get to know some of those homeless people, you know, the chat kids, you know, it makes a big difference, I think, when it's a real person to them.
How old were your kids when you did the stuff in the bears in Pennsylvania and the gleaning, like
middle school, elementary, late elementary and early.
Yeah, our oldest were probably middle school.
Middle, okay.
And it was a one day every fall, just a one day Saturday.
How old's Rachel?
She's in 4th grade.
Going in.
Yeah, she'll be 5th grade. So yeah. I know it seems like such a long time between, you know, all these great exciting things you can go do and getting there. You know, there's a long period between birth and middle school. So Karen had some good ideas, and we've always, you know, kind of had an elderly neighbor. You know, the things that you don't really think about, but they do matter. You know? The hard thing is like sustaining for us, like. You know, if you have an elderly person, we had, you know, 1 or 2 in the church that were kind of like adopted grandparents. They died, so we didn't replace them. So we just, I didn't be intentional. You know, God just sort of dropped those people in our lap. But now we need to kind of go look for them, I think, in some ways. So any other suggestions for, you know, elementary age? Yeah.
One of the things that we've really enjoyed, and obviously it was easier in China, but we still pursue it, is, and I think you've all mentioned it, is having your house open, your home open to people who are different than you. You know, when kids are little, if that's their normative experience, it's never an awkward experience. You know, it's just awkward when you know, all of a sudden they're 16 and you're saying, hey, we're going to have an Iraqi family over, you've never done this before. You know, it takes a lot more. So I think that's something you can do even from the earliest years, and that's their norm.
Giving up your bed for, you know, for a kid that age it's good for them to get used to cleaning it, making it really nice, nicer than it would be for them, for somebody else.
Hopefully.
You find out it didn't hurt so much either.
Yeah.
Right.
I think we've done little things like that, but then I guess when you look back over the years, you can string those pieces together, but now it's sort of just when opportunity comes, you know, and it's not very consistent, but it's okay, I guess. It's okay not to be.
Yeah. Here, this may be a suggestion. When our kid, not so much for your young, for Rachel, she's starting to be aware of neighbors and schoolmates, and maybe some of them aren't Christians, or maybe they are, but there's trouble in their families. Our kids always knew kids whose lives were being kind of wrecked by one thing or another, their parents were doing or not doing. And I think their compassion for other people really started in those relationships with their own friends. And so I think that's a good place to start. You know, go instead of bringing them to something you're doing, say, how can I help you minister to your friends that are
And we were always bringing friends to church and to things going on. Our children always were bringing friends to church. Really seeing lives change.
One of the things we did was we sent our daughter to the Bryants. They were best friends, their daughter and our daughter. Go there, he'll teach you how to do this.
But she taught us how to do it.
And none of our kids could have done, or us, could do any of this ministry without a strong church family that gives the money and gives the support and takes care of your dog and takes care of your kids, you know. That's so important, I think, to be willing to ask. It's a hard thing. I have a hard time with fundraising, but you know, that's, you have to be willing to ask people to help you.
One other just quick partial answer to your question, Kevin, I think, at least in my mind, is one thing we did do is just try to expose our kids to folks who didn't have what we may have. You know, they saw it in West Virginia some, and then even years ago I was working a job where I helped set up healthcare centers for people who couldn't otherwise get healthcare. And we took the kids to a couple of the sites, and one time there was an opening or something, and just explained to them, you know, why do you do this, Dad? And it's because, you know how you get sick and we take you to the doctor? I said, yeah. Well, these people have no doctor to go to. And if people didn't do something, they would just stay sick or, you know, get worse. So just anything even exposing them, I think, kind of began the process.
Alcove back there, and you guys want to ask any questions or make any comments? I don't want you to feel left out in the hall.
I'd like to hear how, what are your all's thoughts or advice on just carving out time for doing this kind of stuff? You know, I feel like I can, my day and hours and week is filled up with, I don't even get a spare minute for myself, let alone time to go think about, hey, let's go drag our family down and serve in this area, or, you know, I could fill up our week with cat club and church Bible studies and all kinds of good things. But, you know, how do you as a family set aside that, and, you know, what are some tips or ideas or encouragement there as far as time management to set aside time to do this type of thing?
I think Karen kind of spoke to it in terms of setting priorities. When our kids were middle years, they were only, you know, we said you can do one sport a year, or you know, you can do piano lessons. I mean, you know, we just tried not to let them get overcommitted. And your kids aren't there yet, but they will be before you know it, in the blink of an eye. Just, you know, saying this is who we are, you know, and so this is going to be important. And it's, you know, just a Saturday, once a month, a Saturday morning. You know, it doesn't have to be a lot. But I think just those little bits and pieces add up.
And I don't know if this is going to be a popular answer, but you have to look at what church activities you get involved in. That's kind of why we left the previous church we were in. We were in leadership there, and you know, we had responsibilities that really kept us almost exclusively involved with caring for God's people that really already have the gospel and already. And these were really, really, really mature believers too. So we're just really polishing off and really barely any tarnish on these people. So the time we were investing in church folks was to the point where we just needed a break from that. And so Michael's and his team have been very gracious to us in the year we've been here, and that we haven't gotten as involved in church life, either us or our kids. And I'm not knocking it, because if you do need to be discipled, or if you have a heart to disciple others, but our heart really is more outward and to be involved in things in the community, in the city, and there is but so much time in the week. And so if you're discipling your kids at home, maybe you don't need every single thing the church offers for your age group kids. And please don't you know, I hope I'm not really kind of stepping out there, because I mean, that's that's one part of what, because we've homeschooled, we have tons of time with our kids. Discipleship's been very, very big part of what we've done, just regular time with each of the kids and going through material and him with the kids really until they were in college. They'd come home for discipleship. So we kind of took on the responsibility of raising our kids in the Lord, and so after that, they kind of needed to see what was out there and people they could minister to. And so anyway, popular or unpopular, just checking out whether you have time for every church activity plus outreach, and then how to balance that.
You have to kind of think about, as they're getting a little bit older, what each child's personality is like and how much they're going to be able to handle too, because some kids can handle a little bit more activity than others, and you know, some are going to melt down on you and not be able to do their homework if they've been too busy the day before. And we just in Bryants, we limited each semester what activities that they were allowed to do, and each one of them got one. Because when you're outnumbered, when you have more than two, you know, you're outnumbered, so you gotta fix it somewhere. And so just a matter of maybe just picking and choosing and praying about it while they're still this age, you know.
You know, when mine were about the same age, I ran into a friend who had 6 children, and they were a little older, and they were doing all this ministry stuff, and I was so frustrated. You know, I said, you know, how do you do missions with a 1-year-old? You know, I was just kind of ready to get outside the home and do stuff. And she looked at me and she said, you're being a home missionary right now. You're doing what you need to do, and that, you know, you're doing, you know, don't even think about it in a way. You know, there's going to be modeling, and they're going to see you ministering to neighbors and ministering to the church. You know, but you got a lot of, you know, several years before, you know, Dawson's even old enough, like Catherine said, to participate in the whole lot. But, you know, you have to be encouraged that, you know, your priority right now is introducing these kids to the Lord and to missions.
I'm curious, you brought up the subject of the theme of relationship with a woman in West Virginia. The kids are really new. I think there's such a richness when service can be, I mean, there's something good about going and giving of yourself, but there's a whole other level of involvement when you get to know people. And I'm kind of curious across the spectrum if you guys have any examples of like venues that really lend themselves to that. And I mean, I'm sure it's a time thing. Like that's not something you can do, you know, once a month or something, or you know, for just a 6-month period, or maybe I don't know. I'm just curious if anyone had good experiences in that area and can share what that looked like or how they got involved.
For any age or for you?
Sure. Yeah.
It's really where neighbors kind of.
Yeah.
Kind of start that with neighbors, finding the old person on the block to be your project. Or, you know, we have a man next door whose wife died, and he's so introverted. I mean, he likes our dog, so we kind of watch out the window when he reaches over the fence. And for some reason, Anna just has fallen in love with this man. And even now, she'll say, "Can we just make Mr. Plymouth some cookies?" You know, I don't know what it is, but she just really has a heart for him. And we really don't have much of a relationship because he, you know, stays in his house. He's just very shy.
I think chat tutoring is a good place, but you guys aren't too far from being able to go do, because there are some young kids down there that if you read a little better than they do, you got a job. And, you know, they're pretty faithful in showing up if you are, right?
And they're faithful to pair you with a person. Like I've had Roshonda for 2 years now, so you can actually track with your child if you don't have a, you know, through the program if you wanted to. Some people move on to the next next site so they can track with third and fourth, fifth.
And I think with young kids too, you know, we used to get a babysitter so we could go do tutoring at Gilpin Court. I mean, for a little length of time. But our kids saw, you know, mom and dad are paying a babysitter not to go out on a date, even though I try to do that too sometimes, but to go do ministry. You know, it's important enough to go do ministry. So, you know, that's something you can do when the kids will say, you two can do that together, and that your kids are seeing that.
Yes.
Thank you. My question is for Jindy, actually. No pressure. No pressure, Jindy. But you have so many spiritual children, right, over the years. And so as you look at these families, like what are the principles that you've seen in these families? And like you've also played the role of overseas missionary and then missionary here. And so I'd just love for you to have the floor a little bit to be able to, like, what have you observed and what counsel would you give, like, to the younger families who are kind of heading into that stage?
Wow. I don't know, because when I came home in '02, a friend of mine who's a grief counselor and an MK said, you know, Jindy, I think part of what you're going through is you have become an empty nester, and that's very difficult for you. And so I hung out in Girls Fellowship when these girls were Lindsay and Sarah and Christina and Abby, and all those girls were 14. And I saw them through high school. And so, I mean, I was just there. I had no role, but, you know, I mean, but I couldn't believe that the first time Jessie was going to go to India, and I thought, oh my goodness, what about, because I never said anything to her about that. And, you know, I mean, I had talked to her about going overseas that summer because, of course, I was interested, she was interested, and we had, and, you know, I don't know, I guess it's taught, not, you know. I mean,
more is caught than taught.
More is caught than taught, yeah. That's your phrase, but I like it. I'll steal it from you.
It's a gift.
Thanks. But yeah, I just really, you know, I really enjoy hanging out with kids. It's strange for me not to have kids to hang out with. So I had a family through last week. They are actually involved in rescuing underage girls from prostitution in India. And they're in their 40s, and they have 4 children, and the mother of that family, you know, I first met her when she was a week old, and helped potty train her, and, you know, it was just a great reunion, and we had a great time, and her oldest is now 17, it's kind of like, this is so surreal. But, yeah, just enjoy hanging out with kids, so.
I think it's been a gift for Stony Point, and, you know, thinking about the kids who you hung out with. I mean, it was a joy to you, but really for them to see that a missionary wasn't some other kind of person, but was really, you know, is a person like me and who's relatable to me, and yet God calls, into doing something a little, out of the box, and loves it, and in fact feels more at home in that environment than in her home environment. Kind of, what a gift, really, to Stony Point that you've been and are in that.
I would second that, because I know growing up in our church, we had, the missionaries were people that we never met. I mean, they would come and once every 10 years or something and talk for 15 minutes, and so I think it's just a privilege to be more part of somebody's life and for our kids. I have kind of a silly question. It's not really a question. It's sort of more like, it could come across as a complaint, but when we first came to Stony Point, I saw your relationships pretty immediately, and I just think that is such a gift. I feel like sometimes in our raising of our children, I don't know whether it's because we moved here from somewhere else or something, but I feel like such an island sometimes, and it's so encouraging to have this opportunity to be together and listen to you and everything. And Christine and I have talked about this a little bit, how there's the kids right now, there's like not as much of a bond, and so I guess it's kind of a prayer request too, that it's not something we can create. I don't think it's something that is truly seems like a gift that your kids have all gotten so close, and it's a little enviable. But did you say were you close to a lot of other families that kind of pulled you along, or you pulled them along, or you sound like you may have pulled them along?
Well, I think we've been at 4 different churches.
We've been married almost 30 years.
10 years, 4 years, 10 years, a couple years. So our experience has changed there, and the kids have had to make adjustments for not having lifelong friends. It's kind of the hand that you're dealt. You just got to kind of work through it.
And we could have stayed in the previous church we were in, where my kids I had my best friends, and we had our best friends and our kids' best friends, but they weren't going the place we felt like God was taking our heart. And so it's difficult to be in a church that isn't mission-oriented, isn't service-oriented. What you going to stay with? And so, anyway, sounds like you've got, stick around, you may have the best of both worlds.
And we always look at things, tomorrow's a new day. So if there's anything you want to change, you start tomorrow. So like if there's relationships you want to make with other families, you want your kids to interact with other kids, that have a vision, something like that, tomorrow's a new day.
And by the way, we got close to some of the other families. It was pure desperation, to be honest. We met these folks in a few months of moving here, and they had young kids, we had young kids, and if we couldn't, it's like, take this kid before I, get rid of them. And we didn't have any family that would help take care of kids, and I know you guys have family, not the same, no believers in your family and stuff. It was just desperation that we got to know people, and God blessed it. But
we had dinner together probably at least twice a week when they were little. We would just call each other, what do you have?
Well, we were short on money too. So.
Yeah, so
your problems are too prosperous.
I'm just saying that is a gift that you guys all
we'd go and they'd put the kids down together and eat dinner. And
but we're all people from somewhere else too.
Yeah.
So it's really not that. I think it's just
right.
And I hate to think that you think you can't have what we've got, because.
Well, I'm not saying, I didn't mean, I thought that might come across the wrong way. I don't mean that I
think I hear you're right.
Yeah, it's just our kids. I just feel like, I don't know, it just seems like it takes so much we're tired.
Yeah.
I think
Stony Point is a different place too, because and the economy's different, a lot more of work outside the home.
Yeah.
And when your kids you guys were all stay-at-home moms for your until your kids went to college. And Stony Point was smaller, so, the people who did have kids at that age, it was really easy to identify.
But not, you know, having, I mean, you have 6 kids, and we have 4. Not each one of them has had that kind of
that
group
relationship.
at church. That's not.
I mean, there's
it's
some
unique
years
to
where
someone.
the graduates stand up and there was one senior.
Right.
And then there's some years where there were like 15 and they were all best friends. So
because I mean, Bishop just graduated, and
yeah.
she was the only girl from James River that came to Stony Point. I mean, there was Luke Kazuska, he's the only graduate that, and he's only been coming to our church for a period of time. So she has never had a close group there because there just haven't been any. There haven't been kids her age.
Yeah. I mean, somebody's up to God. You know what it gives you.
I think the other thing that when they go into that Sunday school class where they're together from 7th grade to 12th grade, I think, and they have the same teachers, you know, like, I mean, I did VBS with Matt Caldwell. I thought, my goodness, you're different than you were in 7th grade. And I had so much fun with Matt this week. I just thought, I mean, last week, whatever it was kind of like, are you the same person that was in my Sunday school class for 5 years? But they get, I think, and that Sarah and Lindsay and that group was really tight. They were the oldest girls for 4 years, and they were very tight, and they were very special, and they were.
That started in what was Pioneer Clubs for those guys, and Janet Murphy, and some of those.
You know, that's one of the things at the younger level that really influenced, I think, a lot of our kids was the Pioneer Clubs, because they talked a lot about missions. Wasn't Pioneer Clubs based out of UTW? I'm trying to remember the group. I don't remember, but anyway, they talked a lot about missions and introduced it at an early age. So I think just talking about it and you know, making them aware at an early age made a big difference.
Well, I hope that, I know I'm encouraged and inspired and excited to have spent 2 hours talking about these things that I know are close to God's heart. Let's just spend about 5-10 minutes just in prayer for our kids, for our families, for our church, for the opportunities that God's going to bring us, and that we would have tender hearts to model for our children, you know, a winsome following of Christ, you know, that is compelling to them as well. So I'll just kind of open